Good morning, 7th grade, and welcome to Unit Number 2, Self-Portrait. Below are two images of a famous artist named Chuck Close. These are both paintings that were created at different times in his life. And yes, that image at the bottom left is a painting of himself. It is not a photograph. This is a style called photorealism. This is a style that he used to paint in before he had what's called a spinal artery collapse, which caused him to be paralyzed, mostly paralyzed from the neck down. And then even after that terrible incident, he was in the hospital for over 8 months and was able to eventually continue to paint and do what he loved, but in a different style, where he would use a mathematical grid to frame out his work, and he would paint different shapes of color to match the light and shadow of his photo so that it looked like a pixelated photograph instead of an actual photo, like photorealism. So you'll be watching a video on him that explains this story and this journey of his as he changed his art style and basically didn't let this terrible life incident, basically hold him back and stop him from doing what he loved. All right, so you'll be watching that. But as we move forward, I just want to introduce you to him because we're going to be creating your self-portrait using a mathematical grid, like in the image over here to the right. Moving on to the next slide. Let's talk about your lesson objectives. Your first objective is that you're going to use a box grid to create a self-portrait with accurate proportions. That's going to be the key. So instead of drawing it like you may have done in elementary school with the circle head, the rectangular neck and the shoulders, and you just draw yourself looking in a mirror, this time you're going to use an actual grid and you're going to copy your photo line by line, box by box, and it maintains very accurate proportions. And whether you feel strongly about your artistic abilities or not, everyone, no matter what artistic level you're at, can actually draw a very accurate photograph of yourself, and I think you'll be very surprised. So that's what makes this really neat. Your second lesson objective is to plan and create a specific message or mood to convey through the application of color. So you're not just taking a generic self-portrait of you just staring at the camera smiling. You can, and that's totally fine, but you're welcome to hold props and you're welcome to be in a certain pose that conveys the person that you are to the viewer themselves. And 3, you're going to write an artist statement that reflects on the artistic process and how it explicitly relates to the intended mood conveyed. So we've already written an artist statement in your previous unit, but in this unit you're going to write your artist statement to specifically reflect the mood you're trying to convey, why you try to convey that, and what that mood says about you as a person. Moving on, so your first vocabulary word is self-portrait. Self-portrait is a portrait of the artist created by the artist. Where a normal portrait, the artist is creating an image of someone else, but a self-portrait, of course, is of yourself, of the artist. And here are 2 examples down here of a student holding a camera. This probably means that he's a photographer or likes photography. He also has a big smile on his face. He obviously seems to be happy. The student on the right looks very serious. Maybe they're trying to convey a more serious side to their personality. And that's going to be completely your choice as to how you want to present yourself. So your first question is, why is creating a self-portrait more difficult for an artist than creating a portrait of someone else? And the obvious answer is that you are staring at yourself. You are staring at all the imperfections that you may see in yourself, and you're basically forced to draw yourself as you see yourself, because you may want to alter something and you may think that, oh, my nose isn't that big, or what if I don't have the freckles in the picture? But whatever you don't add, whatever you don't draw accurately, it's not going to reflect you. You need to draw yourself as you are. And even though I mentioned that we all have our own insecurities and you see imperfections, we need to recognize that we are perfect as who we are. But it's still a struggle for individuals to draw themselves and be faced to look at themselves for exactly who they are. All right, so proportion is a relationship between 2 parts in the whole. I'm going to focus on this image over here. So my lights just went out. Let me go turn them on real quick. I'll be right back. Sorry, everyone, I just didn't want to restart the video because these take a long time. But getting back to where we were, proportion is a relationship between 2 parts in the whole. So looking at this image here, with the self-portrait, you want to make sure everything's the same size. So you can see the eyes being the same size and also placement. These lines here create a very level, accurate placement. So one part of your face isn't shifted too far up, too far down, or right or left. So there's a lot of measurements like this that help basically create the accurate proportions for your drawing. So you want to make sure that when you look at each part, whether it's your eyes or nose, and you compare that to the whole of the image, that everything is the right size. It's not too small, too large. That's a pretty tough definition, but hopefully that explanation helped. So the question that we ask ourselves is, how can proportion affect the likeness of a self-portrait? Sorry, I had a message. How can proportion affect the likeness of a self-portrait? So if you don't draw it in accurate proportions, it's not going to look like you. It may not even look like a person, depending on how far out of proportion you are. So you just basically want to make sure that your proportions are accurate so it looks most like you as possible. Now, when I'm grading you on this, even though proportion and using the math grid is key, I'm looking for a reasonable likeness. I don't expect everyone or anyone to be having a final product that looks like a Chuck Close photorealistic image. I'm looking for a reasonable likeness, that it looks somewhat like you. And of course, you want your drawing to be in proportion, but please don't stress yourself if it's not 100% perfect. You're just doing your best. Next is a box grid. Box grid is just a mathematical grid of equal dimensions. Many of you, I'm sure, have done this in math class before, but if not, this is a representation of the Taj Mahal. You see the grid over top of the actual picture, and then the artist used a grid like this over here to draw it box by box, line by line, and then when they're done, they erase the grid. That's essentially what we're doing in this slide. You're not drawing the Taj Mahal, you're drawing yourself, but this is the method where you'll have the grid on one side and you'll have your piece of paper with a grid over top of that, and then you're going to draw, keep referring to your original image and drawing your portrait box by box. So your question then is, how can a mathematical grid help an artist to create an image with accurate proportions? We talked about how important proportions are, but the math grid, which it's on this paper, it's hard to see because it's pencil, but the math grid basically forces you to pay attention to where those lines, where those shapes rest inside the frame of that box. And once you've filled in all the boxes, the proportions are pretty accurate. The math grid basically helps you focus on each section one at a time, so you don't kind of become lost with everything else going on and draw something not in proportion. So the math grids really help maintain those proportions by framing out each space for each object. All right, scale. I believe this was the same slide from your last unit where the size of an object in relation to another object. You saw these same images. Scale is also important in self-portrait, just like your last project. You just want to make sure everything is the right size. Nothing's too big, nothing's too small. Because, of course, then it won't look like you, which is basically the question, why is it important to create your portrait to scale? Because you want it to look like you. This portrait in the middle, obviously the eyes and nose aren't to scale. They're also not in proportion with the rest of the heads. You kind of both words, both vocabularies playing a part here. And this is almost what the self-portrait would have looked like over here if it was to scale in a proportion. And you can kind of see the artist almost looks like they're looking at their previous drawing going, what is that? Because really that's what you would think. If it's not to scale, it's not in proportion, it's not going to look like you, and people won't understand it, understand your image as you had intended to create it. Your subject is the main idea or object in the artwork. In a self-portrait, that of course is going to be you. And so your question is, how does the size of your self-portrait affect its importance as the main subject to the viewer? Now, I know that's a wordy question, but to break it down, if you look at these two images, you have if the artist was very small, and then here you have this, looks like this metal sculpture of someone playing a flute or something. I'm not quite sure. But that's in the center, it's large, and so is this koi fish. So either the koi fish or this figure here would appear as the main subject. But when you draw yourself large, even though she's not in the center, you can tell that this artist is the main subject because it's the largest figure in the piece. So when you do your self-portrait project, you want to make sure you are the largest figure. so that you maintain yourself as the main subject for the viewer. So hopefully that helped. Mood is a state of mind or feeling. So we talked about one of your objectives that you're going to create your self-portrait to reflect a specific mood. So here you have an artist who looks like, or a student who looks like he knows something that you may not. Maybe he's very curious. Maybe he's very knowledgeable. Here you have, a girl with her head tipped sideways. Maybe she's very happy. Although the colors that are blue might represent some kind of level of sadness, because that's an interesting color choice. And to the right, you have the student, the artist, with a big smile on their face. That they're obviously very happy, seem to be outgoing. And it's interesting here how you can see that they created different shapes and patterns and symbols very similar to how Chuck Close painted his artwork. So this is an interesting way that this artist added color. So how can artists clearly express a specific mood to the viewer? You will do this through either your color application or how you present yourself. So looking at this image here, in the middle, you have this artist with his eyes closed, listening to music. Looks like he's in a very peaceful state. He's relaxing, almost maybe even meditating. So I'm getting a very calm feel from this artist. And to the right, you have another artist who almost looks scared, like they're seeing something we can't see. They look scared or shocked, or they don't know where to go. So between the color choices and the way that you present yourself, your actual pose, your actual action in the photo will express the mood to the viewer. So you want to think about both of these things when creating your portrait. Moving on. All right, so a message is a specific meaning from the artist to the viewer. Here you have two artworks. This is by a famous artist named Frida Kahlo to the left. Frida Kahlo was in a horrible accident where I believe she broke her spine, and she's had multiple surgeries to recorrect the accident and her injury, but she was always in a level of pain. So in her art, she typically draws herself in pain, like with these thorn bush stems, these thorns basically wrapped around her to show that she's always in pain. And here you have Salvador Dali, who was a surrealist artist, who obviously is expressing his kind of quirky, different, eccentric personality with, the way his mustache is styled and the pose, kind of give more of a silly message from the artist to the viewer. So these are just two examples of different messages. So we want to ask ourselves, how can a self-portrait express a specific message to a viewer? It's very similar to the mood, not just the mood that's expressed, but also the symbols around it. I mentioned that in your self-portrait, in your selfie, your photograph, you can have props, you can show yourself in a certain pose, and through these props, whether it's on the main figure or the main subject yourself, or even in the background, these images, these colors, your poses can all express a specific mood. When I look to the right specifically, this is very true to our times with the COVID pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, where this looks like a girl with a graduation cap, says 2020 right here, even says it up top, and the mask, which she would wear to protect herself and others from the virus, and she looks very sad with the tears coming down, basically reflective of her last year of high school or college, wherever she's graduating from, and that it was affected. It just wasn't the same. It wasn't what the normal senior experience that the student wanted. So it really shows that message of, what happened to that student during these times. Even this image over here that's split down the middle, he has half of it in color, half not. The colored side makes me think that these are his main interests. He likes to travel, be on the computer. Here's an image of him with glasses. I don't know what that quite means. Maybe he's very insightful. And to the left, you have people drinking coffee and someone with a scrambled face and other people laughing. So maybe these are more memories of his that he has. And again, that's just my interpretation. I could be completely wrong, but all these images and colors and the way the artwork is composed helps to create this message. All right, the artist statement. We've already done this before. It's an artist's written description of your work. How did you make it? What is it? Why did you make it? And here's some examples of some questions that an artist would reflect on when writing about their work. But why would we do that? Why is it important for an artist to write an artist statement? Just like I was trying to critique or analyze the project I was just looking at